everyone. We're back live with another Between the Pages book chat, and today we have fantasy author Martin Owton here to discuss his Nandor Tales series, and I'm going to let him introduce himself, so take it away.
Well, hi. Good evening, everybody. I'm Martin Owton. I'm, as you can probably hear from the accent, an English author. I have two books out in the Nandor Tales duology, which are non-epic fantasy adventures. I've also got another book out in a different series, which is contemporary fantasy. But I'm going to talk today about the Nandor Tales books.
Okay, so why don't you give us a quick overview of the books?
Well, they are both adventures which concentrate on a very small group of people for whom the stakes are very high, set in a world which would be familiar to those who like Game of Thrones or The Witcher. There's nothing particularly original about the setting or the structure of the magic. I'd like to believe that they're a really cracking story set in a familiar landscape, and it's non-epic, deliberately so. If the bad guys win, the world keeps turning, winter doesn't come.
Okay, so what were your inspirations for the series?
Well, one of my big influences on my writing is the work of David Gemmell, who I read a lot of, was very successful in the UK and in the 80s and 90s, and perhaps is quoted more as an influence these days than he's read, which would be a shame. But he wrote a lot of books where you had a small group of people up against great odds, and you kind of knew that only about half of them were going to get out. And that's an influence, clearly going back further, the old sword and sorcery stories of Robert E. Howard and the Fard and Grey Mouse stories. And as a teenager, I read a lot of books of the sort of 60s men's adventure stuff, the Alistair MacLean, Desmond Bagley stuff, all plot, all action, very little characterization. And so I'm a plot-driven writer. There's a lot going on plot-wise. Working through the characters is always the challenge for me. That's where all the rewriting gets done. But I would like to believe I've got an interesting set of characters, believable, competent, but flawed, and not beyond doubting their abilities.
Okay, so that leads us into the next question, which is tell us a little bit about your characters.
Well, my central character is Aaron. He's the exile of the title. He's a very highly skilled swordsman. He's been trained in the Blade Masters Academy, where young men are trained not just in the use of weapons, but as the right-hand man of some major landholder, a duke or an earl. So they would be their personal bodyguard. They would be the guy who trained their own army, but they would also be an advisor, strategic advisor, and quite, in many cases, trusted best friend. He is the survivor of his homeland being invaded by a rogue warlord who takes that homeland by treachery. His father was the blade master there and was killed along with the earl, but the earl's son and Aaron had been moved out to the capital city before the siege began. So when you first meet him, he's pretty young. He's only about 20-ish, very highly skilled and utterly driven by revenge. He's got a long list of people who he holds responsible for the fall of his homeland and his father's death, and he's working his way through them.
So a bit like Arya Stark from Game of Thrones.
Well, yeah, rather like that. And as a consequence of events which are available as a free story on my website, before the opening of the novel, he's had to leave the capital city for his own safety. He's taken a job as a caravan guard to a wool buyer who's gone up into the hills to this back of beyond little earldom, where he's just looking after this guy who's come to buy the wool. And he gets in a tavern fight within about half an hour of arriving in town, and he kills a guy. Well, that guy turns out to be the blade master to the local earl, who's just the biggest, baddest swordsman in town, and a guy who likes starting a fight. And he picks on the wrong man, and Aaron kills him. At that point, the earl arrests him, puts him in the dungeon, and is planning on hanging him, except that the earl's own son and heir is currently being held for ransom by a more powerful noble, basically the guy over the hill with the bigger castle and the bigger army. They can't afford the ransom, and they have planned to raid the castle to get the son and heir out. The machinations of the countess, who's much, much smarter than her husband, are to recruit Aaron to go on this expedition. As events unfold within the story, he ends up going on this expedition due to his own sense of honor. Don't want to tell you too much about this because it spoils the story. And so the initial part of the story is just going to get the heir from the neighboring warlord, get him out of his castle and bring him home. Things don't play out like that, of course. Nothing is interesting. Nothing is interesting if everything goes to plan. You don't find out about your characters until you put them under pressure and stuff starts going wrong and they have to think fast. And this, without wishing to give away the story, this happens, and through a series of adventures, he runs into an old enemy, somebody who is very high on his list, and that starts taking priority. There's a thread of romance there because amongst the devices that the Countess puts to use to try and convince Aaron to join their cause are her two daughters, who are very nice girls, and they are quite happy to entertain a young man who has nice manners and has been to the court and has just killed somebody that they personally don't like. And there's a certain amount of a love triangle that develops there. And there's a lot of stuff happens. There's several subplots. And I'm very pleased about how they end up together, where everybody ends up in the capital city trying to put things right, trying to get this situation sorted out with the neighboring warlord to stop him invading and to not have to pay the ransom, because if they pay the ransom, the girls have no dowry and the earldom is bankrupt. And it's almost a medieval James Bond. I mean, there's magic, there's sword fights, there's skullduggery, and a lot of intrigue, and there's betrayal, and all the classic ingredients of a rattling good story.
Yeah, sounds like. So I'm assuming from the description that the setting and the worlds are medieval based. Did
Absolutely.
you have any other inspirations, or are they strictly medieval history based?
Well, there are certain parts of my own life, of places I've lived. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have gone to school in one city full of very old buildings, Winchester, and then gone to university, and another city full of very old buildings in Cambridge. Having gone to Italy and gone around Florence and particularly Siena, you get the feeling of an ancient city where you look around, you think there's no new buildings being put up here for 700 years. So particularly the capital city of the king is inspired by walking around Siena. And the setting as a whole, it's medieval Europe without Christianity and with magic that works. A very comfortable setting. If you've read a lot of fantasy, you will think, there's nothing new here. Well, that's true, except there's a really good story here. And the magic is similar to what you've seen before. It's like putting on a comfortable jacket when you need to go out for a walk in the rain. There's nothing going to catch you or trip you up, and you can just enjoy the story without thinking, I don't understand this magic. You will.
That sounds like a fun read. So tell us a little bit about the antagonists of the series, without spoilers.
Well, there are a number of antagonists. The chief one, who you don't actually meet until about 100 plus pages in, is the guy who's essentially the chief of staff to the rogue warlord who took over Aaron's homeland. Lord Tyrellin is very smart, completely amoral, and prepared to do anything to anyone to get what he wants. And what he wants at the moment is riches and immortality. So he's dabbling in dark magic, but he's also quite prepared to hire assassins, and he's got some very nasty things that he does to relax. But he is extremely dangerous.
Okay, so what was the hardest scene for you to write in the series?
Oh, it's the characterization. It's always the characterization with me. I'm fairly good at plot, but making my characters interesting and believable and flawed enough as well that people will identify them with them, because you don't want your central characters, your hero, to be too perfect and right all the time. Stuff isn't interesting when, as I said before, when things go to plan. And your central character can make all the schemes and plans possible, as Aaron does when he's going after Lord Tyrellin. And it looks as if it's going to be straightforward and simple, and he'll get to kill him, and then he makes a mistake, and he's at Lord Tyrellin's mercy. And also the secondary characters. There have been a number of reviews, particularly of Exile, where they've quite justifiably said, well, the girls don't do much other than be a love interest to Aaron. And whilst I think I can justify that, if I had the opportunity to rewrite, I think I would adjust some of that. If you want to see the girls coming into their own and getting to do a lot more stuff, you have to read the sequel, because they get to do a lot more there.
Yeah, well, there's an incentive to read the sequel. If you like the girl characters in book one, read book two for them to come into their own.
Well, the sequel, I think, is in some ways a better book, in that it's more of an ensemble piece, that you've got 3 or 4 people who get a lot more of their own viewpoint time, rather than Exile, which is probably 80% following Aaron. And he's still very much on stage in the sequel. The 2 girls, particularly the younger sister, she wanted adventure, she gets it.
Okay, so what was your favorite part to write of the series?
The bit I enjoyed writing most, okay, this is a bit of a spoiler, but there's a bit where Aaron has to get dressed up as if he's going on a date. And he has a couple of old whores who dress him and make him up and do his hairdressing. And that was just a hoot to write. There's about 5 or 6 pages, which was just such fun to write, where these 2 old slappers are making him up, and he's terribly embarrassed and shy about it, which, considering the facility with which he kills people and his skill as a fighter, he knows very little about young women or even older women. And that was just so amusing, so much fun to write.
Okay, so do you have a favorite character?
Do I have a
favorite character?
A favorite character? Well, I do like writing Lord Tyrellin, actually, because, yeah, he is very smart. He's got all the best lines, and whilst he is evil and amoral, you know why he's doing it. And he is a a guy for whom the means is totally justified by the end, and the end is him on top. And in other circumstances, you could write a story about him where he's the central character, and you could deplore some of the things he does. But if you want a guy who's going to get you results, he's your man.
Yeah, well, the villains are always the most fun to write.
Yeah. He has to be. He has to be smart, because there are other people in the book who aren't smart, and they can be funny or they can be appalling, but they're not a good opponent for Aaron, who is smart, but not as smart as Lord Tyrell.
Hey, so do you have any quirky secondary characters in the series?
Well, the secondary characters, Lady Alice, the Countess of Nandor, is also very smart and completely runs the earldom, because her husband drinks too much and is really only interested in hunting. She's what makes the entire place function, and is really wasted on him. And she holds the whole show together when things go wrong for them. And she's strong, but yet vulnerable, and because she's in a very difficult position. And her husband is absolutely no help at all. He's just going to make things worse if she doesn't keep an eye on him.
Okay, so you also said you written some contemporary fantasy. Do you want to tell us about those books?
The Shadows of Fairy is set where I grew up, in the New Forest, which is a national park in southern England, and the city of Southampton. The central character is a postgraduate student of chemistry at Southampton University, which is in fact my own background. He's half fairy, I'm not. And that fairy blood has led him to have a particular gift, or curse as he thinks of it, because it's something he doesn't want and he can't control. He's touch telepathic, shakes your hand, knows everything you're thinking, but in a fire hose in the face kind of thing. So basically he doesn't touch people. He doesn't like having this, and he can't control it. And on page 2 of the book, he discovers that this talent works on the recently dead. Like very many other postgraduate students in England, he shares a house with a bunch of other students. He comes home from his lab work one evening and finds one of his housemates murdered, touches her body, knows what happened. When the police turn up, he makes a statement and says too much, potentially incriminating himself. And he then is faced with getting hold of this talent and manipulating it, which he has run away from doing for the last 10 years, to get him off a murder charge. And he starts working with the female detective sergeant who interrogated him, and uses this talent, convinces her that he can actually be useful, solves some crimes for her, to the point where she's starting to trust him. And then one morning on a Sunday, she phones him up, says, I've got another body for you, takes him out to the mortuary at Southampton General. There's a middle-aged woman there, been brought in, beaten to death, found out in the country. He puts his hands on her and discovers that she's one of these women who had taken a fairy lover. Something attacked her on the way back from this meeting out in the woods. Something that doesn't belong in this world. More victims start turning up, and it becomes clear that someone or something is hunting down these women who've taken fairy lovers, much as his mother did. And for all he knows, his mother might be on this list, because he's never met his father, but he realizes the only person who can teach him how to use this talent and find out what's going on is this father he's never met. So the story is of him meeting his father, starting to use this talent, discover how to control it, what it can be used for, and stop who or what or whatever it is that is coming through the doorways between the worlds and killing people.
That sounds very exciting. A fantasy thriller. Anyway, so
well, yeah. I mean, it starts out very much as a kind of police procedural with paranormal aspects, and then it just sort of veers a bit further off as it becomes clear that there is a supernatural origin for these murders.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell everybody where they can find you and your books.
Great. Well, the books are available on Amazon under the name Martin Owton. I have a website, martinowton.com. I'm on Facebook as Martin Owton. I think I'm the only one in the world with that spelling. And if anybody else out there has this handle, do please let me go. And I also am on Goodreads. I've got an author page there. And I can be emailed directly off my website or drop me a PM on Facebook.
Okay, so thank you for being here today. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and your books sound very interesting. And that's it for today. And Between the Pages Book Chat, we'll be back on Wednesday with a sci-fi author. So please join us then. Anyway, so bye for now.
Goodbye.